Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. Chops still in full effect. Getting my adamantium installed in a couple days. They say it's a risky procedure, but to quote Grandma's Boy, it'll be worth it. If you don't know that quote, go watch Grandma's Boy. It's a great movie. Hypertrophy Concepts and Tools, number 28. Troubleshooting Lack of Progress. Very interesting lecture. If you watched Hypertrophy Concepts and Tools number 27, which you should have, we talked about how to measure and track progress so we know if we're getting it. Using that previous presentation, go back and watch it if you haven't seen it, you will be keen on when progress is one of the following three possibilities. First, progress is clearly evident and at a rate you find understandable. Like, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Progress is evident, but it is at a rate you find or that you assess is at sub-expectation. Like, yes, you did make progress, but man, given everything you're doing, you really were expecting more. Realistically expecting more. Or, number three, progress is just not evident. Like, it's just not clear you've put on any muscle through any of the ways we measured or proxy that gain in the last lecture. So, if you find yourself in the first category, where progress is clearly evident at a rate you find understandable, you're doing great. And you can always do better, so you can always sharpen up on stuff. But that's all what all these hypertrophy concepts and tools presentations are for. It's the super detail. But if you find yourself in the latter two categories, okay, your progress is evident, but you really were expecting more realistically, or your progress is not evident at all, there are at least 9 formal steps, check boxes you can take to make sure you're not missing any important factors that supply the potential for growth, indicate the potential for growth, or support that potential for growth. Let's get through all 9 of them. Luckily, they appear on one page. This is a good thing to be taking a picture of and putting on Instagram. 9 troubleshooting factors that you can take right to your program if you're not getting the results that you were expecting, and to make sure you're checking them all off. Here we go. Number 1, and they're not in any real specific order. They're all very important. The first one is the most important, but then the order kind of, some are very important, some not so much. They're all important, but some more than others in a nonlinear way. Number 1, appropriate and consistent training, whatever you think appropriate is, consistently, and diet consistently. Because it doesn't matter how awesome your training is, or how great your diet is. If you're inconsistent with either one of them, you cannot reasonably be expecting any kind of detectable progress unless you think it comes from magic or thin air, right? It's like designing a bridge on paper that has this awesome structural elements, and then when you're actually going to build the bridge, you sort of do a good job sometimes. Sometimes you cut some corners, and sometimes you don't do any work on the bridge at all. So when the contractor, or when you're the contractor, when the person who gave you the contract is asking, hey, how's my bridge going? And they come to see that the bridge is halfway built and part of it's collapsed, they're going to be like, oh my God, like, what happened to your plan? Well, nothing happened to your plan. Your plan's great. You just haven't been executing your plan. So this happens a lot. Even number 1 seems almost pedantic, right? Like, do a good job. Duh. Well, kind of duh. Because a lot of people will miss workouts, they'll miss meals, or they'll overeat on a fat loss fan or a fat loss phase or something like that. And then at the end of the day, they'll be like, man, I think I got to try drop sets again. That's what I'm really missing. No, it's not what you're missing. Do your diligence first. Then after that, if you still haven't made the progress you want, then you can get into the details. Without consistency, any of this matters. Now that we've taken care of that, we're going to assume you're being consistent. You can apply point number 2. Making sure your training volume is between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume for each muscle group trained. If you don't know what those mean, you have no way of guaranteeing progress. If you don't know how to measure them, you have no way of guaranteeing progress. Good news is both of those are explained very well, and measuring them is explained very well in the other hypertrophy concepts and tools lectures that come before this. But you have to know, is your training volume at least somewhere in that range from minimum effective to maximum recoverable, period. And that's huge. People say, man, I've hit a plateau with my chest. Should I train it more or less? Next question for them. Well, what's your maximum recoverable volume for your chest, given that you train it twice a week? They'd be like, I don't know. Like, How can you possibly know if more or less is a good idea? You could already be beyond your MRV, and for sure the answer is train less. Or you could be barely at your MEV, and for sure the answer is train more. Or you could be smack dab between the two, and now it's not a more or less question, it's a question of quality, or a question of maybe your chest just isn't growing much for genetic factors or nutritional factors, whatever. So training has to be between MEV and MRV for you, especially for a muscle group like why are my biceps not growing, why are my forearms not working? For you to answer questions like that, you have to have that basic block in there, period. Fix that first. Number 3, fatigue management is fundamentally in line. I would also say this is third most important. Okay? Fatigue management is fundamentally in line. That means sleep is good, stress management is good, your physical and emotional fatigue are in check. They're not crazy high. Okay, because if you've been doing a really good job in the gym and you've been doing a really good job in training volume, but you're going through the worst breakup with your girlfriend anyone's ever been through, and she's stabbed you with an empty beer bottle, I really don't know if that much emotional stress and sleepless nights is going to be surprising to limit your muscle growth, right? So make sure that stuff is handled. And then, okay, that's one more box we checked. And a lot of things is, this isn't so much okay, I've checked all the boxes, damn it, I still have a mystery. As you check each box, you're going to realize, wait a minute, I'm not actually doing this 100%. You're going to do it 100% or close. Then once you check the box, you're going to be like, wait a minute, I can actually stop doing this list because now I'm growing muscle again like crazy, right? So as you check all these boxes, you're increasing your chances for actually growing muscle, right? Number 4, making sure the exercises you're choosing consistently have high stimulus to fatigue ratios, especially high raw stimulus magnitudes. They're actually causing muscle growth to be stimulated versus like, oh, I'm training, right? Because a lot of people won't train hard enough. They won't train with the right exercises. Someone will say, man, like I'm really having trouble adding size to my lats. They say, okay, like what exercises do you do? Like I do this row and this one arm pull down. And you could say, okay, do you feel tension in your lats when you train? They're like, no. Burn at higher reps in your lats? No. What about a pump? Do you get a back pump? No. Disruption, like can you feel your lats like messed up? Like, nah, honestly, I can't even tell they're back there. What the hell are you expecting them to grow for? There's no correlate of you actually stimulating muscle growth at all. So make sure you are implementing your program with technique, with exercise selection, so on and so on, in such a way as to actually get good workouts by high raw stimulus magnitudes and high stimulus to fatigue ratios, period. Then, all that fatigue management, MEV and MRV and appropriate consistency is being put into the right place. Number 5 is really an extension of number 6. It's making sure that you're using the right repetition ranges for targeting the right muscles and the right exercises to have high stimulus to fatigue ratios. Because people can say, man, I'm training hard. I'm doing everything right. You say, okay, your quad training, your quads haven't been growing. Huh? Like, no, not nearly as much as I want. Okay. How are you appropriately training your quads? Yep. Squats and all that stuff. Great. Diet's good. Volume's good. Fatigue management's fine. Stimulus to fatigue ratios are pretty decent, right? Like someone can say like, well, for me, squats work a bit better than leg presses. So I've been doing more squats and I've got the technique that hits my quads the most. You're like, okay, sweet. What rep range are you using? Like, man, sets of 5 to 10, like fucking heavy weight to grow, right? And you're like, Try sets of 10 to 20. They try them, and after 2 sets, they can't walk and they throw up blood. And they're like, oh my God, my quads are sore for a week and a half. How the hell did this happen? Like, well, sometimes the legs and sometimes other muscles really benefit from higher reps and just they grow much better. And they go, holy shit, I didn't have no idea, right? So even if you're training hard and doing sort of all the right things in the context of a certain repetition range, make sure you're exploring other ranges and biasing most of your training to where you have the highest SFRs, the highest disruptions to the muscle, the most pump, so on and so on and so on. Because a lot of people will train muscles in ways they think they should be trained and for years not see very great gains. A lot of it's because you're chasing weight. We've all come from a perspective, most of us anyway, of just getting stronger, and we're meatheads, right? So we're meat guys and meat gals. We want to lift heavy. So that 5 to 10 rep range, a lot of times is really like seductive and we just do it a lot. And we're like, man, my triceps haven't been growing. I've been doing everything super heavy. And all of a sudden you just drop the ego one day. You do a lot of push downs and dips for high reps and your triceps get blown out. And then weeks and weeks and weeks later, it's not just a one-time thing. You just get these great responses and you end up adding slabs of meat to your triceps. You're like, what the hell was I doing for years going too heavy? Why am I so passionate about this? I've done that for years. I came from a powerlifting background, so I was trying to skyrocket. I was trying to drive my deadlift as high as possible, drive bent rows in sets of 5 to 10. And what I realized was, for me, bent rows in sets of 10 to 20 caused way more growth than sets of 5 to 10. It's good that I realized that, fixed it, and then got great gains. Because a lot of people will struggle and fundamentally be training well, but ignore the right rep ranges for the right muscles or the right mix of rep ranges. That can happen in the other direction too. People doing a bunch of pump shit and squeeze shit for their pecs, and it turns out when they just do sets of 5 to 10 hardcore, then their pecs grow a ton. They'll be like, damn it, I didn't want to have to lift heavy. Well, guess what? Bad news for you, right? Number 6, huge one. You should be in hypercaloric phases when you're trying to gain muscle. I know, it's really crazy. And adding body weight, net body weight, over the last months or years. How can I put this without making it sound crazy? People will say, hey, look, I want to be jacked. I haven't put on a lot of muscle in the past several years. My next question to them is usually this: how much did you weigh several years ago? And I say, like 150. How much do you weigh now? They're like, 150. I'm like, so you're a lot fatter now then? They're like, no, like I'm pretty lean, and I was pretty lean back then. Cool. Have you tried going heavier than 150, like gaining weight? And they're like, yeah, I tried getting to like 155, but I look a little bit softer and I like that. Okay, sweet. How in God's name are you supposed to put on muscle if you're already lean and you weigh the same fucking thing? Show me in a physics book how matter and energy conservation allows that to happen. Where the hell's the muscle coming from? Can you imagine seeing someone at 150 pounds and years later they're still 150, relatively the same leanness, but they just look way more jacked? What? That Jackie Chan meme? How does it even work? If you weigh 150 and you want to be more jacked, years later, you had better weigh 160, and years later, better weigh 170, and so on and so on and so on. Right? That's why Mr. Olympia weighs 200 and some odd pounds, because there's no way to be jacked without gaining weight. I know it sounds crazy, but people do this all the time, where they'll be super attentive to detail, have great training, great everything, but they're not willfully extending their body weight reach to new heights. And a lot of times that means for months on end during the end of muscle gain phases, becoming uncomfortable, getting a little fatter than maybe you had wanted. Not super, super fat, but a little bit fatter, stuffing yourself. You don't want to eat 500 grams of carbs, but today's a 500 gram of carb day. You will do it because you're done weighing 168. You want to weigh 174. Only 174 is going to happen is discomfort all the way from 168, which was your previous heavy weight last year, to 174, which is going to be your new heaviest weight this year. It's all pain. All 69, 70, so on and so forth is awful. You feel like throwing up all the time. It's part of the process. If you've made multiple attempts to gain weight, successfully gain weight, but all of it has been fat, okay, these other ones are real important now, and maybe the ones I'll talk about right after are very important. And there may be nothing to do about that. Maybe you're a genetic ceiling. But if you haven't even tried to gain meaningful amounts of weight by, in context, methodically stuffing yourself a little bit here and there and pushing your weight on purpose up and up, then you haven't really tried. And it might be that you're missing most of your muscle gains. Because here's a really, really crazy fact. The one thing that may be keeping you from gaining muscle is just your appetite. Period. Your muscles may be bleeding, starving for growth, but you're 7% fat at 150 pounds, and there's no way, unless you gain weight, you are going to be gaining muscle at 7% fat. Doesn't matter how anabolic you are. What's that supposed to happen? You're going to gain from muscle from 7% fat without gaining any weight. That means your fat goes from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 while you're in maintenance? Get out of here, right? Unless you're the best genetics of all time and you're a total beginner, that's never going to happen. So if you're 7% body fat at 150 pounds, you're going to have to add actual weight, period. And if you haven't done that, that's arguably one of the biggest things in here. Number 7, on the training side, doing good fatigue management. If someone tells me that I haven't been making progress, one of my little sort of canaries in the coal mine kind of questions is, how are your deloads? How often do you take them? There's the worst thing you could tell me as an answer to that is, I did go, what's a deload? Like, holy shit. Do you ever take a week off of training or take a week of lighter training? Like, yeah, once every year or 6 months when I get hurt. Bad answer. Okay. If every several months, at least you're not taking a deload or at least a week off of training, you're doing it wrong for sure. Okay. Active rests. Do you sometimes get away from the gym for 2 weeks on end, let the psychological fatigue cool down, let the connective tissue stuff cool down? If the answer to that is no, it's not as big of a deal as long as you're taking deloads. But if you're sufficiently advanced, active rest is a really good idea. A lot of times, pro coaches, when they inherit a client that's an IFBB pro, they will ask them questions like this, and it turns out the guy hasn't taken a break from running hardcore special sports supplements or training like a wild animal for 3 years. And they're like, well, so what we did with Frank when we first started was I just told him, because I was already a famous pro coach, this isn't me talking, this is me citing someone. I said, listen, if you believe what I'm doing here, if you want to go to the Mr. Olympia, like all my other clients, you're going to take 3 weeks off of training and all of your supplements right now. And a lot of times people are like, what? I hired you to make me better. It's like, you are a walking mess of halfway injuries and crazy amounts of fatigue, and your health's not that great. Let's cool you off. They take that, literally, this stuff is on Instagram. People talk about like, oh man, my coach made me do this. A month later, they look flatter, they look worse, but they're feeling like pretty rejuvenated because they have not taken a break in years. And all of a sudden, after another month, they start to weave back in all their training, all those supplements, and then boom, and then boom, and then boom. And then all of a sudden at the Mr. Olympia, they're up 5 pounds, down body fat, best ever. They take 5th place. Holy crap. How did it happen? Well, they took their active rest for the first time in forever. They just had no idea that was a thing. Right? How many people really tell you, you got to drive hard, train harder, and do all this stuff, and you'll be a champion? Everyone? How many people say like, yeah, every year you should take like 2 weeks or a month off or very light training completely? What the hell? I've never heard that shit. That's very, very rare. But sometimes that's what has to be done. And if you've never done that, that could be holding you back. And of course, low volume phases. If you're always cranking super high volume, maybe some low volume would really help. Some very, very well-known coaches do that with their athletes, and they have very, very good results for reasons obvious to you if you've been paying attention through all these other hypertrophy advanced lectures we've been doing. Number 8, huge one, is all of these changes 1 through 7, making them for enough time to see a difference. If you've been doing all the stuff right and you've been doing it for a week, and you're like, man, I haven't gained any muscle. What the hell is wrong with you? You can't even measure muscle gains over a week. There's no instrument precise enough to do that. So you got to do it for months, not weeks or days. If you could look back and say, I've been appropriately training and dieting for months. I've been within line for my volume landmarks. I've been fatigue managing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've done all these things, all the 1 through 7 stuff, super well for months. And then you haven't gained any muscle. You got a hell of a puzzle on your hands. But if you do them all for months, most people will gain really, really decent amount of muscle and be like, oh, holy shit. Well, there you go. Right? So stick to it. It's not just consistency, it's duration. You can be consistent over a week, but weeks and weeks and weeks of consistency is really what it takes to figure out, am I doing the right thing and is it really working? Right? It's like trying to take a class in French to speak French. You do like 3 lessons. You don't really speak any better French. People are like, hey, you still taking that French class? You're like, nah, fuck that. I didn't learn anything. So I stopped. Like, wow, man, that sucks. How many classes did you do? You're like 3. Like, oh, so you know, like amour and like whatever the fuck the word for dog is. Like, yeah, well, that's not enough. Like, well, don't you need to be in French class for like 12 weeks to get some basic conversations going? Like, oh, I guess. Why the hell did you quit after 3 weeks? Folks, sounds like I'm preaching to the choir. People do this shit all the time. Your clients do it all the time. They try something for a week. It didn't work, right? You got to give it due diligence. At least a mesocycle, probably a block of training, 3 or 4 mesos in a row. Then you can say, okay, did I really do my best? Did I gain muscle? How much did I gain? So on and so forth. Lastly, this isn't really a check mark. It's more of a real talk kind of point to see if you're being sane. Point number 9 is having realistic expectations for what good gains are in your current situation. I actually told this story in the last lecture, but I'll retell it a little bit differently. I've had at least one person that I can remember very clearly, but dozens of others over the years, hit me up and say, look, I'm not getting really, really good gains. Okay. I'm not gaining, they'll even say. One particular individual said, look, I can't gain weight. And I said, because I was wise to the shit by then, I was like, oh, I can't gain weight. Okay. How much weight have you gained over the last several months? And he was like, well, like he told me a number and it was basically like half a pound a week. And I was like, you gained half a pound a week over the last like 12 weeks. He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's really good. He's like, is it? And I'm like, yes, that's almost ideal. And he's like, I wanted to gain a pound a week though. And to him, literally, if it wasn't a pound a week of tissue gained on the scale, it was failure. He just thought he wasn't gaining any weight. So he literally came to me and said, I can't gain weight, even though I've been eating all these calories, so on and so forth. Now look, like if I was green to the shit, if I had no idea what I was doing, it was my first rodeo. And even if I had all the science knowledge, but no practical experience working with clients, I'd be like, oh my God, like, holy crap. Like, let me look at the Karras-Benedict equation, run the carb numbers. You should be gaining weight. Like, oh, I wonder, like, are you taking stimulants? Or maybe your sleep's not good. Maybe you're non-exercise activity thermogenesis is crazy. You're like a recreational cyclist in your spare time. Like, no, I guess not. Hold on a second. Let's not assume that this is all as correct as it is. Let's ask the person, hold on, so what actually has been happening? People do the same with strength. Like, man, I can't get my bench press to go up. Like, okay, how much did your bench press go up over the last year? They're like 25 pounds. Like, what the hell? That sounds like gains to me. And they're like, yeah, but last year it went up by 50. Well, gains have an asymptotic nature to them. It's curvilinear. As you get better, you still gain, but at slower and slower and slower rates. So that just makes sense. I think a lot of people think they have a plateau. They're just in that curvilinear phase, or even compared to other people in the same training age, they're getting really good gains. Other people aren't. They just have a wrong reference point. Sometimes that reference point is gains they used to get. Look, when you start at 120 pounds, all the way up to 140, you can gain a pound a week, no problem, because that's easy. When you get to 140, a pound a week may be tough. And are you getting half a pound? You're thinking, oh man, I'm treading water. You're not. You're actually gaining. People do that stuff with strength. They do it with everything. And sometimes the reference point they have isn't even something they used to do. It's something they see in a magazine. Like, well, this bodybuilder gained a pound a week. I should be doing that too. And anything else is failure. BS. So make sure you at least have a realistic understanding of how much you can be gaining. A bunch of people, I think Eric Helms, Alan Aragon, Menno Henselmans, they have written in depth about what especially naturals can expect on average, just on average, right? To gain year to year to year over the training over the first like 5 to 10 years of training, right? These are not gold standard, like for sure the truth, but like if you're gaining 5 pounds of muscle a year and their numbers say you should be expecting 2 to 3 and you're complaining that you're not getting any gains, you're just wrong. If their numbers say you should be gaining 5 to 10 pounds of muscle a year after the first, let's say 2 years, and you're gaining 0, okay, you got to get through these factors because realistically you are underperforming. Know those reference values, know especially what you used to do. And if you can even just do the same as what you used to do or a little bit worse, you're already winning. But if you expect, like when you were a beginner, your gains to be like this, and now that you read a bunch of science books and no periodization, for them to be like that, that's not going to happen. The best result is that they just do this again. That's incredible. Can you imagine just doubling your beginner gains? Fuck yeah, that's awesome. More realistically, and still awesome, is they start to do this, right? They go, like that. What you don't want is this, okay? You don't want at no gains or worse, right? You don't want like this, kind of sucks, just a little bit of increase. But this is great. You're still going up at a pretty decent rate, but not as fast, right? So keep that in mind to make sure you're not second guessing yourself and doing a lot of paralysis by analysis. You mean like, shit. Oh, I got to do all these 9 troubleshooting factors. I'm not gaining any muscle. Whereas you look back in the last year and you've gained 10 pounds. And compared to other people of your training age and gender and so on and so forth, you're ahead of the curve. What the hell are you doing? Just keep doing a good job. And when you actually have trouble gaining, according to the reference standards, then you can really apply these. Don't have to waste your time overthinking things if there's no reason to do so. All right. So big implications before we cut this off. There's no such thing as satisfactory gains. Notice I never used once in this entire lecture the term satisfactory gains. People hit me up on Instagram. They're like, I haven't been getting the gains I've wanted. Guess what? I don't weigh 9,000 fucking pounds, which by definition means I haven't been getting the gains I wanted because I wanted to look like Hulk from that first movie with Ang Lee, where that motherfucker's the size of a tank. He's like 12 feet tall. I don't look like that. So my gains are not satisfactory to me. Okay. There's no such thing because faster would always be better. Can you imagine if you were gaining muscle like a pound a week? Crazy, right? But then there was this pill which had no side effects and no health maladies aliens gave you. And they're like, you can gain half a pound of muscle a week faster if you take this pill. Would you be like, nah, no thanks, aliens? Of course not. You'd be like, fuck yeah, you got 2 of those pills that I can take, right? No such thing as satisfactory gains, right? But there's realistic gains and there's a bit shy of realistic, right? And if you're a bit shy of that realistic gains, which is an honest calculation you have to make yourself with the help of some of the resources I talked about earlier, then it could be due to the 9 factors that you can troubleshoot, and then you get back to really good gains, expected gains, realistic gains rather, or it could be due to genetics, right? You may just not be able to gain much faster because of your genetics, or you're reaching your genetic ceiling and you've done most of the gaining you ever will, right? So once you've given the 9 factors due diligence, there's no guarantee that your progress will speed up because it could be genetic stuff, or there's no guarantee it'll speed up at all. It could just be the same or it could still be worse because time is going on and your training response is getting worse and worse and worse, right? Or relatively speaking, yielding you fractional, smaller and smaller gains. But, huge but, at least you'll be reasonably sure that you're getting the gains your genes are limiting you to. What you don't want is to be stuck in that situation where you're like, well, I guess I've hit my genetic ceiling, and you never even learned what MEV and MRV were. And then years later, you're just puttering along, you learn about the volume landmarks, and you gain 10 pounds of muscle in 2 years. And you're like, what the hell? How come I didn't know about this earlier? So with 9 factors, apply them to your training, make sure you're doing a really good job. And a lot of you folks will be able to check mark everything here already and be like, I already do all that stuff. And if you do, great. Then you're getting the gains you literally deserve in the sense that you worked for them. If you haven't applied those 9 factors, you should before you conclude anything about your genetic limits or where you're going or what, the future holds in store for you of how much muscle you have to gain. All you can do is your best. Your best, not someone else's best. Your best. So do your best with applying these 9 factors, see what kind of gains you get, and enjoy those for what they are. Folks, thank you so much. See you next time.